Castlevania 2 is not a bad game. In fact, I would say the current Castlevania franchise would be nothing what it is today without it. It was the first game in the series to incorporate RPG elements such as leveling up, upgrading and swapping out weapons, and actually exploring towns full of citizens. Even the assistant director of Symphony of the Night, arguably the series' best game, said Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest was an influence on his game, especially in regards to the exploration side of things. It would seem with all this going for it, Simon's Quest would be one of the most loved games in the series. However, it continually shows up on critics' worst Castlevania games list and has a full bandwagon of fans who hate the game. So why, if this game contributed so much to the series, is it such a hated game? So today, let's explore where this hate is coming from and put forth an argument as to why Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest is not a bad game. Before we get too far into that, welcome to the Ogles channel. Thanks for watching today. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to click that subscribe button down below for your latest and gaming news, reviews, retro stuff, cats, a lot of things like that along the way. But let's get back to why Castlevania 2 is not a bad game. Much like Zelda 2, Castlevania 2 is often accused of being so cryptic that players could never figure out where to go without the help of a guide. While I'll admit that Castlevania 2 is more cryptic than a game like Zelda 2, I do not think this game is impossible to figure out without a guide. Let's take for example, the most cited cryptic part of this game, kneeling at Deborah's Cliff for a whirlwind to come and take you away. Many players say that this is not hinted at or mentioned in the entire game to allow players to know what to do, but this is not really true. In Castlevania 2, you have crystals in the game that can allow you to open up certain pathways. Earlier in the game, you are offered the hint to replenish Earth, kneel by the lake with the blue crystal. You then go to Yuba Lake, kneel in front of it, and the land is exposed. Also, Bodley Lake requires the same technique to be used. It is clear that when you have a crystal that you can kneel in important places to unveil new paths. So when the hint, wait for a soul with a red crystal on Deborah Cliff is given, it should be fairly obvious that one is to use the red crystal in a similar way as the blue crystal and kneel at the edge of the cliff. I will admit that the game doesn't specifically tell you to go and kneel at the edge of Deborah's Cliff for a tornado. However, part of an adventure is discovering and figuring out cryptic messages. When you figure it out and crack the clue, you have such a feeling of pride in yourself. This is often lost in modern games, and when it is done in modern games, it's even praised endlessly. Take Dark Souls and Resident Evil for example, where they give the player vague clues in order to figure out how to advance in the game or to find secret areas. These games often win Game of the Year or even Best Game of All Time in some cases. However, when people apply the same logic to old games, they view the game as a broken mess. I'm not here to argue that Simon's Quest is not cryptic. I'm just here to argue that if you follow the clues given by the NPCs in the game, many if not all the puzzles can be figured out without a walkthrough or without help. Another cited problem in this game, which builds off the first complaint, is that many of the NPCs' dialogues are just not true. And that is true, that the dialogue is not true. Let's make that less confusing. Sometimes NPCs lie to you. While yes, this is annoying, it actually makes great sense with the story of the game. You are cursed in this game where your body is rotting away, and while some townspeople remember you from the first game and your heroic actions, other townspeople may see you as an enemy, blaming you for the curse that's on the land, and therefore are less trusting of secrets and even tell you lies to throw you off the path, since they think that you might be working for Dracula's side. While some players will find this annoying, I personally think it adds to the adventure and the setting of the game. This game is dark and an unwelcoming landscape for our former hero where citizens are rude and their lack of trust makes total sense. Also, let's do the current game comparison to expose the criticism even more. In all the Souls games, there's a character named Patches who lies to you and leads you into harm's way and often betrays you. He is a favorite character of modern players to make jokes with and enjoy the joke that developers are playing on the players. So this is a fun joke that's acceptable in new games. However, when Castlevania 2 did it as literally part of the story, disgusting, and the game is trash. I think if players actually played Simon's Quest and understood the atmosphere a little bit better, then they'd be far less harsh with their judgment on this particular aspect. Another hated issue of this game is the day and night cycle. During the day, the towns are open, you can visit the healing church, talk to the citizens, and enemies are less powerful. However, when the night falls, everything shuts down and enemies are much more powerful. This often gets hate because people don't enjoy waiting for the text to interrupt them every 5 to 10 minutes for it to swap over. However, this transition only takes like 5 seconds for it to swap, and it's grossly exaggerated. This is no more of an inconvenience than when you go to purchase an item or heal up in literally every RPG game. And yes, sometimes you have to wait around for a town to open up to continue your quest, but that's just part of trying to make the game more immersive. Plus, by doing this, it forces you to fight more enemies, which they give you twice as much experience at night, so to some degree, it's the game trying to help you advance your character more. Also, other games like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time do the same thing with closing shops at night and forcing you to fight monsters. That wasn't enough to keep Ocarina of Time from being one of the greatest Zeldas of all time, so the day-night cycle in Castlevania 2 shouldn't be a disqualifier for it in its respective series either. And let's get to the difficulty side of things. This game is cited as both the easiest and the hardest Castlevanias, which I always find entertaining to read. I think critics would be better off saying, if they wanted to criticize the game, that it's just simply uneven in its difficulty. The vast majority of the enemies in the game are pretty easy to take on, especially as you upgrade your weapon and get new items. However, the platforming elements can be pretty tough. Some of the jumps you just have to learn how to handle well, but that's honestly part of just how NES games were sometimes. Take any of the Mega Mans, they all had platforms like this where you get knocked off at any time and die. Even the first and the third Castlevania had exactly the same parts as this. The difficult platforming is not unique to this game. Also, the fake floors that you can fall through at any time, they are annoying, but it also keeps you on your toes, having you to use one of the game mechanics of constantly throwing out holy water to see where you step. I don't think this is a bad mechanic though, and once again, it just adds to the atmosphere of the game, to watch out for your step and really be careful in this new atmosphere. All games have you learn how to be careful in certain areas to avoid death or certain traps, and Simon's Quest is really no different. Speaking on the enemy difficulty though, many players also cite the bosses as being too easy and too few bosses in the game. The first part I'll agree to, because the few bosses in this game, they are pretty easy, especially if they have the appropriate items. However, the focus on this game is not the bosses, the focus on this game is the adventure itself. Journeying through the levels and finding clues and figuring out puzzles is clearly the focus of this game, and defeating the bosses is just the final part of a long series of puzzles. I don't see an issue with the way they chose to do the bosses and the number of bosses that they had. However, the final boss, it could have been a bit more difficult than just standing in one spot. But let's move past the most hated parts and the defending of that. Let's talk about all the awesome aspects of the game in and of itself. Simon's Quest is one of the best stories and atmospheres of all time. Following the events of Castlevania where you defeated Dracula, you have a curse upon you where you continue to rot away until you find all the scattered parts of Dracula's body, bring him back to life, and then kill him again. The towns blame you for what has happened and they're terrified of the events that are taking place. They lie to you, hide from you, and has a very melancholy atmosphere. This game is much more than a quest to defeat a bad guy. It is a story of how a hero who is blamed for the events of the past and his quest to set things right while he himself is dying away. And to add on top of that, the story of this game also has 3 separate endings depending on how fast you beat the game. While this feature is quite common nowadays, back when Simon's Quest was first released, it was one of the first games of its time to have this innovative idea. Let's also talk about the weapons in this game. While many do repeat from the first Castlevania, this one expands and allows you to swap between your special weapons. This was a huge upgrade from the first game. Also, the parts of Dracula that you collect often allow you to have a special passive ability to choose from, like a shield or energy regeneration. Little features like this really add to the experience of feeling in control in this game. The exploration, while mentioned passively in this video, it is clearly one of the best aspects that this game has. Having a full open world to search through, finding secrets, hidden allies, lost books, weapons, parts of Dracula's corpse, and so much more creates one of the most unique experiences on the NES. This is not a straightforward platforming game, it is one of the first fully open world side-scrolling games that there ever was. Truth be told, all the best Castlevania games took inspiration from the best aspects of this game. Like Zelda 2, I think many people over the years have just heard how difficult and cryptic this game is and chosen to hop on the bandwagon of hating it without ever giving it a fair try. The very things that dislike about this game are things that we praised for in current games. Yes, it is cryptic, but not so impossible that if you are willing to dive into what the game is offering, that you can't figure it out. Yes, the game is difficult in some areas, but no more so than other NES games, and even some games to this day. And even the cited day and night flaw is so overblown, it's ridiculous. But even if these things did bother you, there is so much in this game that is amazing that if people really experienced the game, I think they would fall in love with the world and the atmosphere that Simon's Quest presents. So if you've never given the game a try, ignore the hate and give the game a full playthrough. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, go out there, find a great game to play, and just simply have a great rest of the day.